All right. So hello, everyone. My name is Zach Adams, and I'm a principal consultant with IdentityWorks LLC. A little bit about myself. I'm a developer to the core. Started as a mobile app developer and have done everything from Wii U game development to Pebble smartwatch development. But today I find my passion in automation, engineering, and working with platforms like IIQ and some of the DevOps platforms out there. It's just something that really touches me. But today I'm going to be speaking with you about one of my favorite plugins, the IdentityWorks Rule Runner plugin, and how you can implement it into your development and troubleshooting workflows. So to get started here, who are we and what is the Rule Runner plugin? Well, we here at IdentityWorks are a independent consulting company that provides various services in the identity and access management space, and a SailPoint partner specializing in new and existing implementations of IIQ for various clients. And just like our clients' different verticals, wants, and needs can wildly vary, so can their existing processes and policies. We found that clients' existing processes and policies can sometimes create bottlenecks in the development or troubleshooting process. Things like developers being unable to leverage the IIQ DA toolkit, or maybe an inability to deploy exploratory changes or possible fixes to an environment like a production environment. Maybe onboarded applications may only have a production environment available, like those SaaS applications that you just can't get another instance of. Or you may have limited access to the IIQ DB. While some of these are necessary limitations, these do all highlight a major issue when it comes to developing in IIQ. This underlying issue I'm describing is a lack of accessibility. So when a rule or a workflow requires a multi-step process to deploy and execute, that is an accessibility issue. When a new or existing onboarded application consists of only a single production environment that is sensitive to change, that is an accessibility issue. When IIQ development teams lack the ability to query against the IIQ DB directly to troubleshoot, that is an accessibility issue. So the question arises, how do we make developers' lives easier, make them self-sufficient, and make IIQ more accessible? Enter the Rule Runner plugin. So the Rule Runner plugin is a plugin that provides a light web-based IDE to write, modify, and execute Bean shell code with complete access to the IdentityIQ environment data. Some of its many notable features include an easy-to-read web-based text editor with syntax checking and highlighting, and the ability to switch between light and dark modes for developer comfort, asynchronous interruptible rule execution with custom timeout capabilities for managing those long-running rules, the ability to create new rules and modify existing ones in the plugin's IIQ environment, rule variable creation to mimic variables passed in from objects, say like workflows, creation rules, customization rules, etc. Rule library inclusion, so you can include those massive methods that you built up over the years directly in the plugin. Quick glance documentation windows, so you can actually view the IIQ Java docs directly within the plugin. And then execution results for real-time log capture and return object capture. And we also offer a rule history for the current view session to revert or refer back to from previous Rule Runner plugin executions. And we're constantly adding more features as we find new needs. But today, I'm going to be discussing with you 3 real-world scenarios that we've encountered where Rule Runner was instrumental in resolving issues or accelerating our workflows. So our first scenario involves accelerating feature development here. This is in regards to creating and testing application definition rules for a newly onboarded application without the need to trigger aggregations or make changes in the onboarded application by what I like to call prototyping. Usually in the case of things like the SaaS applications that may only have a production environment, or if you're not very well aware of what data you're going to be getting back from that application. Our next scenario is going to be urgent issue resolution. In this, I mean preventing a production issue. This issue was what we'll call stale workflow cases, where they had been causing version store pressure buildup in the production environment. And using Rule Runner, we were able to safely remove some of these objects while providing a list of the objects that were being removed in real time. And then finally, complex troubleshooting. So troubleshooting those difficult workflows that have 15 steps plus attributed to them. In this scenario, this was a long-standing issue where the workflow of an identity's AD account, or involving an identity's AD account, had a specific attribute that was improperly retrieved, and pass through the downstream steps. Modeling the specific workflow step helped developers to resolve this issue. So in these situations, just as a disclaimer, I did not have the ability to run Eclipse off of a workstation due to technical limitations on that workstation. I did not have the ability to use the IIQ DA Eclipse plugin or VS Code extension due to network team requirements. I did not have direct access to the IIQ DB. And in some cases, I didn't even have access to the Catalina logs or any of the other logs that you would find on the application server. So moving into our first scenario here, accelerating feature development. So during the application development onboarding process, you have many application-specific rules to work with when pulling in accounts into IIQ. Traditionally, you test these rules by running an aggregation after developing them, and would have to view the logs directly on the host server after having made the appropriate changes to the log4j properties file. This can be a time-consuming process and an almost impossible task if you're developing an integration from a dev environment to, say, like a target application that only has production environment, going back to that SaaS application again. In situations like this, you can use Rule Runner to actually prototype the rule that you'd like to create without the need to perform aggregations, create multiple test accounts, or hunt through the logs. So how would you do this? First off, we start by creating the application definition to the point where you can run an initial test connection and schema discovery successfully. Then we can go about creating the base desired rule in the application definition. From there, we'll navigate over to the rule runner and open the rule itself and utilize the variable section or hardcode, our input arguments, found in that particular rule type. And then we can develop the logic in that rule as we see fit, including whatever log statements that we want to make sure that everything's operating correctly. And then whenever we're ready, we can save the rule and run it for our first aggregation. So all of this, no aggregation being run, no data being filled into the IIQ instance. During this time, don't forget to remove your hard-coded input arguments if you went that route. And then also make sure that you apply the rule to its designated type on the application definition if you've not already done so. And then, of course, run the aggregation the first time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a quick demo of what that actually looks like here. In my screen here, we've got a version of IdentityIQ version 8.3 P2. We have one application definition set up. This is a delimited file application connected up to a local CSV. We can see that the test connection is successful, and we can also see that the schema was pulled down successfully. But we can see that we haven't actually run our aggregation at all. There's no accounts in here or anything like that. We'll also see that there's no rules currently assigned to this application definition either. And for this scenario, we're going to create a customization rule. So I'll go ahead and start by opening up and creating a customization rule. We'll call it application customization rule. And we'll have it just return the object itself. And this is one of the arguments that are fed into the customization rule here. So I'll go ahead and save that. And I'll apply it to the application definition and save it, because Lord knows I have forgotten to do that many a times. So we have that saved in our application definition here. And now what we'll do is we will navigate over to the Rule Runner plugin. It's usually underneath the IDW plugins category. Listed as IDW Rule Runner plugin. So whenever we open that up, you're greeted here with a rule editor screen. We can go ahead and start by opening up that newly created rule. We'll click the open button here, and it'll pull in a list of all of the rules currently existing in this environment. We can see our newly created application customization rule. Open that up. And what will happen is that the actual variables that are listed at the top of that rule object are auto-populated into our variables section here on Rule Runner. We'll go ahead and only link up the most important variables. This is going to be the application variable to get this rule to run. So we'll go ahead and hit edit here. We'll see that it's the correct variable name, the correct class. And then for this initialization value, we'll do an object lookup for that application name. In this case, staff list. We'll save that. We click done to go ahead and load it into the rule runner here. So if I hit execute, it will load in those variables and actually run it as if it was running from like an aggregation standpoint. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to paste in some pre-written code here. With Rule Runner, I have developed a lot of template rules that perform generic functions that I've had to do multiple times throughout the years. So things like retrieving resource objects from an application that I have not yet linked up to IdentityIQ or created links for. And these rules will usually have things like blocks for, just specific needs, like creating that connector that you would have before doing an aggregation. And then I start by running a test configuration to make sure everything's working fine. I know it looked great on the UI there, but I just want to make sure. And then I'll loop through all of the resource objects within that application there. You don't necessarily have to do this. If you have a large amount of objects within an application, you'll need to decache through the loop just to make sure that you don't have any performance issues, but you'd want to loop through all of like the resource objects, maybe to catch those edge cases that you wouldn't usually expect. But if you have one user in mind, you can always change this out to something like a get object here. But to go ahead and get started, we want to know exactly what attributes are available from this application. So we'll run this here, and you'll see that it's being output to a log debug statement. I haven't changed anything on the log4j properties files. I don't even have access to that in this particular VM. So whenever we run it, we'll see all of the accounts that are being pulled in as resource objects and their attributes assigned to them. In this scenario, what we're going to try to do is change the ID attribute from its three-digit value that it is now to a combination of the first three characters of the username plus the ID value here. So say we're going through and we're doing our little testing here. We've added in our logic. We'll make sure that that looks good here. So we'll see I've added in that combination between the username and then the ID attribute here. And we can see in the extra log debug statements that I have that we're actually combining those together successfully. But now we want to go ahead and check for edge cases. We don't want to deploy to QA or prod and then realize that there was an edge case that we didn't account for. And now's the perfect time to check for that. So I have an if statement here to check for if the username or the ID field are empty or null, and also if the username field is less than 3 characters. And I'm going to output this out to an error level log statement. So we'll run that one more time and take a look at our log here. We'll see that there's 2 errors that were present. It looks like Optimus Prime doesn't actually have an ID attribute associated with him. And I took it a little bit early here, but what we went ahead and did is we added in a catch condition to make sure that if they don't have an ID attribute value, that we assign it here at this point. So basically what we've done here is we have created the customization rule logic and actually accounted for edge cases without ever even pulling in any of this data and creating any kind of link objects for new identities or creating new identities for that matter. So now that we're happy with this, we know that this is what we're looking for in the customization rule. We'll go ahead and clean up some of our prototyping logic here and add that return back in at the very bottom. So I've added that back in. I'm going to remove my loop here. Enclosable iterator. We don't need the test configuration anymore. So we just have our try there. And I'll also remove this block here for my extra imports that I no longer need. And at this point, whenever you hit run, it's not going to work anymore because object's not being initialized, the variable isn't. But just to show you, this is what exceptions look like in Rule Runner whenever you run it. It will actually give you a little bit of that stack trace and tell you exactly which line that error is occurring. In this case, line 6. And you can already see all of these syntax highlightings that are occurring as I write this code here. But since we're ready to go and apply this to our customization rule, all we have to do is hit save. This will save what's in our rule editor back to the application customization rule listed here. And what we'll do is we'll go over to our application definition. So underneath recent here, this is one of the features with our UI user page enhancer plugin that I know some of y'all have been asking about. We'll go right back over to our staff list. Oh, yeah, let me get back over here. It's a little bit faster. And we'll go over to our rules and open up our customization rule. And we'll see that our code has been saved successfully as we have it in Rule Runner. Now with this, we're ready to go ahead and run our first aggregation. I'm going to open up the toolbox, another one of our user page enhancer features. Click on quick run task. I had already created a task definition for that aggregation, but I have not yet run it, as you can see from looking at the accounts page there. So I'll go ahead and run that for the first time now. And once that's done, we'll go ahead and refresh the page here and take a look at the accounts. As we can see, we've only done one aggregation and everything came in perfectly. We have our new concatenated ID. And then for Optimus Prime, who didn't have an ID value, we can tell that we had accounted for that edge case by looking at his link object here. So that's one use case for Rule Runner where you can go through and do prototyping to make sure that everything is accounted for before you actually even run an aggregation, whether that be in dev, QA, prod, whatever. Moving on to our next scenario, resolving time-sensitive issues. So in some mature IIQ implementations, we've seen a buildup of non-persistent objects like workflow cases that should have been removed after successfully completing, but instead remained in the environment due to failures during aggregation. We also see events where workflows and tasks may trigger repeatedly or scheduled tasks lap one another, performing the same tasks over and over. These behaviors can lead to things like DB performance issues or performance issues where the IIQ application server itself is kind of bogged down. And while there are many out-of-the-box methods to go through and stop and clean up these objects and workflows, Rule Runner gives developers a little bit more control over what objects to terminate and in the system while providing real-time output of what's being deleted and also offering emergency stop capabilities when you're actually performing those cleanups. So how do we do this? We start by opening up Rule Runner and we start building a filter to target those offending objects. In this case, we're going to be removing stale workflow cases. This can be as simple or as advanced as you want when we build the filter, like checking to see if object is greater than 30 days, which is what we'll be doing, or you can dig even deeper and try to see if the object is still running or in a sleep state. After that, we'll go ahead and use the Terminator class to loop through and delete these objects safely, removing the child objects as well. And during this loop, we'll also include log outputs to show it's being removed in real time because that log field is updating in real time as the rule executes. For a large number of objects, make sure you're decaching through the loop. And if you want to, you can also try doing multi-threading, but your mileage may vary. So during this loop, you can stop the execution at any time using the stop button. This will use the asynchronous monitor thread that's triggered during execution to show those log outputs to safely terminate the running rules thread. So I'll show you that here right now. We'll go back over to our IIQ demo instance here. And underneath our developer quick links plugin, we'll open the debug menu and then go down to workflow cases. Now, underneath the workflow cases, you'll see that we have 6 dead workflow cases here. They're not actually dead, but that's just what I decided to name them there. But they are all from different periods of time. This one right here from October 2022. Why is that still there? Well, we're going to go on over and clear it out in Rule Runner. So what I'll start by doing is click New here. One thing to keep in mind is that Rule Runner does not need to have a saved rule object in the environment in order to execute rules. It runs whatever is in the editor. So what we'll do is I'll go to my personal little rule library. I like to think of it as my Batman utility belt. Many rules, many tools. So we'll grab my clean stale workflow case example. And this is for clean stale workflow cases, but I can use this to clear out any old object and perform housekeeping functionalities. But to kind of walk you through this rule here, you might be familiar with it as I pulled it off of the Compass site many years ago and I've edited it to my needs. We're looking for any workflow case names that have a similar naming scheme to dead workflow case. We're looking for them to be older than 30 days. And as we go through and we do the loop, we're outputting, like I said, to the log using log info level log statements. So, and then of course, decaching whenever we reach our limiter. So we'll go ahead and run this real quick. And you'll see that the log statements did populate in real time. It happens so fast because I only have 6 right here. And then you'll see in my actual return statement, I include a little bit more information about what was deleted. So that way you can go through and review it in a retrospective with your team. But say you have tens of thousands of rules to work with here, right? Where it's going to take excess of like 10 minutes to actually run this. And you don't want to leave it unoccupied. What you can do is say you need to get up and get a drink of water while you're doing your cleanup task. And it's taken a while, but you don't want to leave it unattended. You can click that stop button to go ahead and cancel it real quick. That spinning is a feature, not a bug, by the way. It makes it run faster. So what is happening here is you'll see that it will output that the execution was terminated for that rule and tell you exactly what time it terminated. And you can see the actual stack trace for what happens whenever you actually cancel that execution. But going back over to our object browser here, we'll refresh. And you'll see that only our 2 workflow cases that are less than 30 days old still remain. So another really great use case or scenario that we've used Rule Runner to resolve some issues. But moving on to our final work case here, workflows in IIQ can span many steps and utilize data from many different sources. You know, you have those workflows that have 15 steps to them. And while operating silently in the IIQ environment, for this reason, many issues may not actually present themselves as like a failed task result or show errors in the log, but instead show themselves as unexpected behavior, either in IIQ or in the end application. Maybe attributes in that AD account don't have the correct DN, you know, maybe it's a difference in casing. But troubleshooting these workflows can prove to be difficult, as triggering them may require multiple conditions to be met, repeated runs to get all the log information, or you're having to reach out to your stakeholders over on your upstream teams to try to trigger those workflows over and over. But by prototyping individual workflow steps with mock variables, like mentioned earlier when onboarding a new application, developer can actually effectively troubleshoot without the need to ever even trigger a subsequent workflow from the defective one, and without affecting any identities or links in the environment. In this scenario, we had an issue with a client's AD integration where a specific string attribute was used to assign birthright roles. And about 5 steps in, we were seeing an issue. While the workflow would complete successfully and some of those roles would be assigned, one role was missing, although the attribute looked correct in the actual identity after being mapped. So what we did is we prototyped the steps and included extensive log statements to verify that all the values being used looked correct. And then once we reached the offending step, we realized that the issue was due to a conditional missing logic to standardized casing before performing the string comparison that would assign the role. Common problem that we see a lot. But as a result, the fix was quickly implemented and tested in the prototype, then implemented directly into the workflow. Again, not ever having to trigger the workflow another time besides the initial failure. And then overall, the troubleshooting process and fix took less than a day on an intermittent problem that had persisted for months. And no action was needed from that AD team to create test users and, like I said, triggering the workflow. So I'm unable to mimic this use case in a live demo just because of the complexity of it, but the process to troubleshoot it was similar to the first scenario of prototyping a customization rule. We do not need to create a new rule object to execute the bean shell code. You just take a copy of the workflow step that you want to troubleshoot and put it inside of the rule runner editor, and then assign the workflow variables either using that variable screen, or you can go through and have a block at the top of your rule to go through and actually assign those variables. In this case, what we did was we took one of those intermittent users, since we couldn't replicate it every single time, we found one of them that was affected and used that in our troubleshooting variables. So we then added as many log outputs as needed to verify our bean shell logic to make sure it's performing as expected. And like I said, was able to resolve without any other issues. And this style of troubleshooting would be tedious, if not impossible, if you were doing this by creating a rule object and executing them from debug directly. I mean, I wouldn't even recommend it. So a bonus tip for you in that particular scenario was, how did I find the right workflow? So in this case, there were multiple workflows actually with overlap and functionality where they were performing similar role assignments based on attributes from the same application link, but neither the current developers or on my team or myself had written these workflows, and we did not have documentation or stories outlining how the feature was first developed. So what we did have was the debug log output from when the last failure had occurred. So like I said before, I like to try to keep a generic library rule list, my Batman utility belt, that I specifically use in Rule Runner to perform tasks like the aforementioned clean stale workflow cases. And one of them that I find most helpful is my search object contents rule, which you can see here on the screen. What it does is it simply iterates through the environment and searches object XMLs for a specified string. And the use case for this was absolutely different than what I was trying to solve in this scenario. Really, what I built this for was, in most of the teams that I've worked with, not many of them had one-for-one parity between the objects that were deployed to the environment and what was stored in the repo. And this rule took less than an hour to write in my free time over a lunch break, and helped troubleshoot multiple client environments over the years. So to kind of wrap this up here, these were just a few examples and a taste of Rule Runner's capabilities that I can share in this short time frame. But the takeaway from these scenarios are Rule Runner provides the accessibility to experiment and innovate. It gives you the freedom to explore IIQ's many classes and quickly develop shortcuts and solutions. By making bean shell development and IIQ more accessible and streamlined, you make development more fun. You boost morale and you build developer confidence that in turn encourages innovative thought. And that's something you can't really assign a value to. It's an invaluable thing. In my time, I've created rules that clone identities, rules that handle impact analysis, rules that handle housekeeping, rules that test custom classes that we develop at IdentityWorks that have been loaded into the environment. The possible uses are endless whenever you have a sandbox to work in. So we at IdentityWorks have developed many incredible plugins that you guys have seen already today and will see as Dev Days goes on. And over the years, we feel that the Rule Runner plugin in particular should be a part of every IIQ developer's toolkit. And with that being said, I'm happy to announce that we've decided to open source this plugin, and we'll include links to the public repository and build plugin binary on the Dev Days forum, so that way you and your team can try the Rule Runner plugin for yourselves. This is something that, as you can see, is running in 8.3p2 and is backwards compatible, I would say down to about 7.3. So feel free to download it and try it for yourselves. But thank you all for your time today. If you have any questions or would like any more information on our plugins or scenarios discussed today, feel free to reach out to me on Discord or in the Dev Days forum. My name is Zach Adams, and this was the IdentityWorks Rule Runner plugin. Happy Dev Days, everyone.